Awesome. So I believe we are live.
Awesome. Well, I'll share my screen now and then you can take it away with the intro.
Perfect. Awesome. So good evening, everyone. My name is Charles Lockwood. I am one of the conference co-directors of PIELC this year. I am ecstatic that you all chose to join us tonight. We have a very special keynote address that we would like to present. We are really excited. Sophia Kianni is a 19-year-old Iranian-American climate activist specializing in media and strategy. She is the founder and executive director of Climate Cardinals, an international nonprofit with over 8,000 volunteers in 40 different countries, working to translate climate information into over 100 languages. She currently represents the United States as the youngest member on the inaugural United Nations Youth Advisory Climate Group on climate change. She also works as a climate advisor at the American Lung Association and sits on the board of directors at Community X. Lastly, Sophia's work has been featured in several news outlets, including Forbes, CNN, Business Insider, and Time Magazine, to name a few. And she's recently been named Vice Media's Youngest Human of the Year, selected as the National Geographic Young Explorer, and chosen for Energy News Network 40 Under 40 list. So I will let her take it away.
Well, thank you so much for that generous introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be speaking to you all today. Here is my presentation so that you can get a better idea of all of those things that Charles listed off. So as he said, I am the founder of Climate Cardinals. I'm a climate activist. I'm 19 years old. I'm an Iranian American, and these are some of the accomplishments that I earned in 2020 as Vice Media Human of the Year, Energy News Network 40 Under 40, and National Geographic Young Explorer. So today I'm really excited to be speaking about my journey as a climate activist, really how I got to the position I'm in today, having my own nonprofit and working with the UN, and also really sharing the lessons that I've learned over the past few years, navigating the youth climate space, and how I think other people can support these young activists, and also how people can get involved. So continuing on with my presentation, the question I always get asked is, why did you become a climate activist? Was there some sort of spark? What happened? And really for me, the story begins about 6-7 years ago when I took a 2-month trip to Iran, which is my parents' home country. Both of my parents were born and raised in Iran, and so I grew up visiting Iran a lot when I was little. So on one of those trips, I was really struck by how horrible the pollution was. I live in Washington, D.C., where it's a city, so it's a little polluted, but what I saw in Iran just absolutely blew my mind. And you can see in this headline here, just like 2 years ago, heavy pollution in Iran hospitalized 1,500 people in 24 hours. And that's very similar conditions I was seeing in Iran. And something that I repeat often is that it was so polluted in Iran that I went on my grandmother's balcony and I looked up at the stars and I realized I couldn't see them because pollution was so bad. And so I was a bratty 12-year-old. I was curious. I wanted to know more about the climate in Iran. And so I started to do research, really building off of like the climate science that I learned in middle school. And so what I learned shocked me. And so I learned that, like, you can see that headline right there, how the Middle East is suffering on the front lines of climate change. So really what that means in more practical terms is if you're looking at climate change, the way that it's affecting the Middle East is that temperatures there are rising more than twice the global average. So of course, climate change is affecting all areas of the world, but the Middle East is really being hit hard, and that included Iran. And I thought that was horrible. And I really wanted to make a change, but I was 12 years old. What was there that I could do? And so being a young person, I really turned to the adults in the room, which were my relatives and my mom and my dad. And so when I was talking to my relatives in Iran, I told them about climate change, and I told them how it was something I was really concerned about and how it was really affecting the Middle East. And I asked them why I felt like nobody in Iran was talking about how horrible the pollution was. Because, I mean, I was like, if this was America, I feel like if the pollution was this bad, where like you're having to, like pre-COVID era, having to like wear a mask to go out and it's like affecting your health badly, why do you guys think this is normal? And their answers really shocked me. They had no idea what climate change was. They really didn't know what I was talking about, and they weren't very worried about the environment. And that was a shocking realization for me as like a 12-year-old, realizing that I knew more about the climate change that was happening in Iran than my relatives did. And I later learned that the reason why was because there's very little climate information available in Farsi, which is their native language. And the press outlets in Iran just weren't talking about it as much as they were in like the United States and in English speaking countries. And so I'll elaborate later on about how that really inspired me to found Climate Cardinals. But like at the time being, when I was 12, what I was doing was I was working with my mother to translate climate information into Farsi to teach my relatives about climate change, because I really felt like it was something that they deserved to know about, because it was something that was affecting their community so negatively. So I was probably around 12 years old at that time. So I was translating information for my relatives. It's something I wanted them to know about, et cetera, et cetera. So that went on for a few years. That was middle school. So then I became a high schooler. And so when I became a high schooler, I began to get involved with these grassroots climate organizations. These might be some familiar names to a few of you, but I'll also just go through all of them just so that you all know what these organizations do. So I think it was like my sophomore or junior year of high school, I realized that there was really a climate movement happening. You saw people like Greta and Jamie Margolin in the United States. So you saw these youth climate activists really using their voices to make change happen and to talk about these issues that they felt were affecting their communities. And I immediately knew, oh my gosh, like there are young people just like me who care about these issues. Of course, I want to get in touch with them. Of course, I want to help them further their causes. And so the very first climate organization I got involved with was This Is 0 Hour. So specifically, I reached out over Instagram to their deputy director of partnerships, and I said, hey, this is me. I've been working to educate my relatives in Iran about climate change for the past few years, and I love what you guys are doing. And then she actually offered me a spot on their team. So what This Is 0 Hour does is they are a youth-led nonprofit that really centers women of color at the forefront of the climate movement. And that's because women are disproportionately affected by climate change because we tend to have less socioeconomic power and political power. And so it's easier for us when we're affected by climate change. It's harder for us, like climate change induced disasters. It's harder for women on average to bounce back from that, like when their houses are destroyed and things like that. And then also because people of color are the worst affected by climate change. Like marginalized communities are usually hit the hardest, especially because of issues like environmental racism. And so with 0 Hour, a lot of the work that I was doing was organizing like these climate marches, as well as workshops to teach people about climate change and really getting to the roots of like systematic racism in our country and how it really helped to exacerbate climate change. And then in addition to 0 Hour, I got involved with Fridays for Future. And so Fridays for Future is the movement that was started by Greta Thunberg because she was skipping school every Friday to strike. And so that definitely struck a chord with me because as a young person who, I mean, I'm currently in my freshman year of college, but I was a high schooler at that time. And so I thought that it was really amazing what Greta was doing by skipping school to strike for climate action, because I agreed with her that it seems really futile to be studying for a future that is in jeopardy and to be sitting in school while knowing that the people in power, the adults in power, the politicians aren't acting on this crisis that we know is going to really seriously harm our generation and generations to come. And so with Fridays for Future, I was working like on their national team and helping to plan global strikes, like the strikes that were like the September 20th, 2019 strike, where millions and millions of people like came out and striked, and really working also on communications and press and making sure that activists' voices were being heard. And then really one of the last groups that I was involved with was Extinction Rebellion. Extinction Rebellion is a really interesting organization. Their whole ethos is really based around championing nonviolent civil disobedience in order to make people pay attention to the fact that we are in a climate emergency. So really akin to how in the civil rights era, in the women's suffrage era, people took to the streets, they marched, they made sure that their voices were heard, they made sure that press, media, everyone was paying attention to them, and they were disrupting our normal systems and how they behave by striking. And so that's what Extinction Rebellion really believes is necessary in order for people to really understand this is a climate emergency, this is a crisis, just like how coronavirus is a crisis, and everything in the world really stopped for a long time because we were in an extinction crisis that needed to be addressed because people were dying. Well, people are indirectly dying because of climate change, and it is a crisis. And so we really need to completely change our systems in order to act on it. So that's really what Extinction Rebellion believes and how they operate. And so with XR, really the work that I was doing was in DC. I helped to organize a number of strikes. Most notably, I went on strike in Nancy Pelosi's office in 2019. And that was honestly like that was the first time that I really got public coverage, I guess. That was when I was kind of thrust into the public eye because it was a hunger strike and it ended up kind of going viral. I was like the subject of a profile in the Lily. And it was definitely really interesting for me because I think that that was one of the first moments that I realized, wow, like social media and press attention are so incredibly vital and so incredibly helpful in making people notice climate change and notice climate activists and notice the demands that we're making. And that was a lesson that was really imparted on me that I've really worked on for the past 2 years to continue to get this amplification that was able to get me so many opportunities and open a lot of doors and make people take me more seriously. And so like I touched on talking about Fridays for Future, I really felt like while I was organizing with these groups, the biggest accomplishment that we were able to make was that we had over 4 million people go out into the streets and strike in 2019 on September 20th. And that was very much driven by people like Greta and all these thought leaders that we really had who were, I don't want to say trendy, but making climate change an issue that everyone was thinking about and talking about. The issue really came when COVID hit. When COVID hit, I felt like a lot of the momentum of the climate movement was kind of halted. Rightly so, because the coronavirus pandemic took priority. But that was kind of a negative point because there wasn't a lot that climate activists could do, because so much of our work has been built around raising awareness, going out into the streets and striking, which is so important. And yet we couldn't do that work anymore. And so it kind of posed a conundrum, and it was part of the reason why I launched Climate Cardinals around last March. But also part of what I noticed in the youth climate movement was, so I had my experience in Iran where I was like, okay, like my relatives don't know anything about climate change because they don't know English and all the climate information is only available in English. And then here I am working with these global organizations, basically like the largest youth-led nonprofit organizations in the world. And none of these organizations were addressing my concern. That was, we need to tackle language inaccessibility. It makes no sense for us to be assuming that everyone in the world speaks English. It's just, that's not a fact. A lot of people in the world don't speak English. And so I really did find issue with that. And so for a number of years while I was working with these organizations, I tried to spearhead translation initiatives. I tried to make it part of these organizations. But I soon realized that this was something that really needed to be its own thing, which is why I decided to start Climate Cardinals. So that was my what's next. After years of working with these climate organizations, I realized that I couldn't just be complacent. I couldn't just continue to work within these systems and then expect for the change that I wanted to see to occur, because it wasn't occurring. And so that's why I started Climate Cardinals. And so Climate Cardinals is an international nonprofit, and our mission is really to make climate education, climate information, climate resources, all of this more accessible to people who don't speak English. And so what we do is we translate climate change information into a growing array of languages. We are currently translating into over 100 languages. And we do a lot of it through our huge array of student volunteers all around the world. And so we have over 8,000 volunteers in 41 countries, and our volunteers have an average age of just 16. And so we also have 15 directors running the organization. I'm currently acting as executive director, and we have around like 500 team members in addition to our volunteers who really work on things such as social media, research, communications. And the impact that we've had is that we have translated over 6,000 pages, which is around 500,000 words of climate information, into over 100 languages. And so I'll go back to the point that I made about the COVID pandemic. So as I said, Climate Cardinals has been an idea that I've had for years, basically. Ever since I was translating this climate information for my relatives, I knew that this was something I wanted to continue to do. But I was working with these organizations and I was trying my best to continue to bring about change with the striking, and everything was going great. But then when the pandemic hit, I really realized, okay, well, there's very little we can do now. We can't strike anymore. And that was the main thing that was going for us. We can't hold marches. We can't hold meetings with stakeholders. What can we do? And I realized that, well, Climate Cardinals is something that you don't need to be in person for. All of our volunteers work from home. They work virtually. And it was also a way for a lot of my friends, who were, I was a senior in high school at the time, but a lot of my friends who were juniors in high school, they were really oh, we need to earn our community service hours for National Honor Society. And so it kind of clicked for me oh, well, we are filling the perfect really bubble that needs to be filled. We are giving young people an opportunity to continue their climate action from the safety of their homes. And we are also really providing this opportunity. And so what we did was we launched during near the beginning of COVID. And we basically had a viral TikTok video. We created this video where we said, hey, students, we know you're stuck at home. We know that you want a way to earn community service hours, and we know you care about climate change. So this is what you can do. You can translate climate information from the safety of your home and help us to increase accessibility, and we'll put it on our website. And we had over 100,000 people view that video, and over 1,000 people signed up to work with us on the first day. And so social media has been a huge way that we've been able to leverage it to gain all of these volunteers. And I think that's especially important in today's day and age, when so much of everything is online, and social media has just become a huge part of all of our lives. And so I kind of skimmed over all of this, but founding a nonprofit is really hard. I thought that you could just say, oh, I'm founding a nonprofit. This is my idea. This is what's going to happen. I'm just going to create a website, bam. But that's actually not how it works at all. And so I'd love to share this with you guys in case any of you guys are interested in founding your own nonprofit, or you're just curious. So these were the lessons that I kind of learned while knowing I wanted to found Climate Cardinals, but I didn't really know how to do it. So the biggest thing that I really learned was, above all, like, if you want to be a climate activist, even not even just like founding your own nonprofit, if you want to be a climate activist, you need to know your why. Why are you doing this work? Why is this work important? That is a question that I honestly asked like every single day. And then I have to reiterate like my story in Iran. And I think it's really important to know, what is your personal connection to this movement? Why do you personally care about climate change so much? Of course, everyone needs to care about climate change, but like, why you in particular? Why are you putting all of this time and energy and resources into doing this work? And I think that's also important because we are avoiding having voices come to the forefront of this conversation who don't really belong there. Young people like me, especially people of color, we don't want to be talked over by like old people in the room who have never dealt with the effects of climate change, who have never really seen it firsthand. And I think that's part of the reason why it's so valuable to have young people in these spaces, because a lot of us, I mean, we're progressive, and we've also like lived in communities where we've seen how hard like climate change has hit them. And that's why I think it's so important for people to know, why are you doing this work, and why are you founding this nonprofit? What are you filling? What hole are you filling that doesn't already exist? There's like probably thousands of climate nonprofits that already exist. And so you don't want to just duplicate the work of someone else. You don't want to make a nonprofit that already is existing, basically. And part of the reason why is because it's so hard to get funding as a nonprofit. Even Climate Cardinals, as we've grown like larger and larger, it's still such a struggle for us to get funding. I do all of my work for free. And like getting funding is always like really critical for just making your operations work and scale. So again, I just want to emphasize this because I think it's so important. You need to know your why. Why are you doing this work? Why this nonprofit? Why should people care? And so then what I did was I wrote a mission statement. I said, this is Climate Cardinals, like this is what makes us different, and this is what we're trying to achieve. Then more like technical, mundane stuff is like, we had to design a logo. I got in touch with a graphic designer, and a big part of everything in life is branding. And so it's important for it to be something that will stick out, something that people will remember. And so at the very top, you can see that's Climate Cardinals logo. And I always get asked, like, what made you think of the name Climate Cardinals? And it was a variety of factors. I wanted something catchy that people could remember, like CC. And I wanted something that really symbolized the work that we were doing. And the work we're doing is we're translating climate information in over 41 countries. And so like Climate Cardinals, like a cardinal symbolizing like information flying around the world. And then our logo, which is beautiful, which was designed by our graphic designer. And so I know that like seems like a really mundane, like small, like step, but I think it's really important, and having a good foundation for us and being able to have this like brandable name and this logo, I think really has helped us to get far, because we haven't had to do like any redesigning or anything. So I would say like first write your mission statement, design a logo, and then definitely creating a website, a way for people to contact you, especially potential partners. Because like Climate Cardinals now is working with so many different organizations. We're working with the UN, we're working with National Geographic, the American Lung Association, and a lot of it is because we made ourselves very available to people. And it's really easy to contact us through our website. And also for our website, like we're able to house these thousands of pages of climate information that we've translated. We're now in the process of getting all of that up there on our website so that anyone who wants to learn about climate change, like it's not these translations are just falling in a void, but that people can actually access it and learn about the work that we're doing and learn themselves about climate change. Then I think a step that's definitely like not talked about enough is you need to find a fiscal sponsor, or like you need to incorporate as a 501c3 nonprofit. So having 501c3 status means that your donations are tax deductible. And you're also able to give community service hours to young people. Like that's what the National Honor Society and other like schools will actually accept as nonprofit hours. And so we knew that like the primary thing that Climate Cardinals is giving is we're giving young people community service hours for translating climate information. Like that is how our entire organization works. So for us, becoming a 501c3 was super important. But becoming a 501c3 is a hard process. You usually have to hire a lawyer to help you incorporate articles of like articles of incorporation. You have to just go through all this paperwork. It takes several months for you to be approved. And that was something I didn't have the funds for. I didn't have a funder for Climate Cardinals. I had to pay for the website myself. I had to really self-start everything. And so I knew there was no way I could pay thousands of dollars to hire a lawyer. And I think most people can't do that. And I don't think that should be a barrier for entry into the nonprofit world. And so I found out like this solution, which is you can find a fiscal sponsor. So that's basically a nonprofit who says that they are willing to basically like be your umbrella organization. They like sign off everything for you so that you can make like tax deductible donations through them. We have like a number that like an official like IRS number that people can put down for community service hours and everything. And so we found a fiscal sponsor through this organization called Future Coalition. And so they help to support young activists who are interested in founding nonprofits or who are just generally interested in advocacy work, and they like help to match them with fiscal sponsors. So for any young people who are interested in founding a nonprofit, I would definitely say finding your fiscal sponsor through Future Coalition is a really great opportunity. And then for anyone else, like generally, I would say that like you can just contact a nonprofit and ask if they're willing to fiscally sponsor you. And then they usually just take like a percentage, like a very small percentage of your donations in return. And then really the last thing that I did after like doing all these steps was, of course, I had to build an initial team. And so I just got together a couple of my closest friends to help to like get the word out initially about Climate Cardinals, to manage onboarding our volunteers, to write up stuff for the website, like all these like little things that really needed to be in place to help manage everything. And I think that was so critical because there's no way I could have done all of this myself, especially in regards to, I mean, we had our influx of 1,000 volunteers over a 24-hour period, and we were overwhelmed. We had no idea how to like handle all of that. We had to like interview people for director positions. It was just a whole ordeal. And I think really the reason we were successful is because I had already recruited like 5 of my friends to help me with this work. And without them, it really wouldn't have been possible. And so I definitely think for anyone who's interested in founding a nonprofit, it's so important to be able to have a team to lean on and for people to be able to work with. And so this was something that I touched on, but that I really want to elaborate on, which is the importance of social media and press when it comes to mobilizing people to volunteer for your nonprofit, for getting people to talk about climate change, because right now we live in the digital age. Everything that is worth talking about, everything that's important, it's online. And I remember one particular moment. So when I was at my hunger strike that I was talking about earlier, that was the first time that I went viral and the first time I really like gained recognition from people. I was talking to one of the reporters and who was at the strike, and he was like, "Oh, why are you hunger striking? Like, what is this going to accomplish? Like, why am I here?" And I really looked at him and I said, well, if we weren't doing a hunger strike, like, would you be here? Would you be amplifying our demands? Would you be talking about like climate change? And he admitted that he wouldn't be. And then I was like, exactly. Like the reason why climate activists have to go to drastic measures to raise awareness is because that's really the only way that we're going to be thrust into the public eye. Like, I don't think that I'm going to solve climate change by going on hunger strike. But what I am going to be able to do is I'm going to be able to get in front of thousands of readers, thousands of people on the news, and they're going to listen to what I have to say. And like really what we were trying to say was that like some politicians were calling the Green New Deal the Green New Dream, and we really wanted to tell people that if we really want to be serious about climate change, we need to pass the Green New Deal, and we need politicians to take it seriously. And so these are some of the news outlets that I've been featured in. And so I would say for anyone who really wants to raise awareness about climate change, it's so important to be in contact with journalists and to really make sure that everyone is talking about this issue, really with like the same severity that we're talking about COVID. COVID has blanketed airwaves day in, day out ever since it began. And climate change has still been getting worse. It's still been happening as this crisis has been progressing. And we don't see nearly as much coverage of it. And I think that that really is an issue because, I mean, a few years back, a study found that it was like 40% of the adults in the world had never heard about climate change. And that is an incredibly alarming, startling number. 40% of adults, they don't know about climate change. They don't care about climate change. And so a lot of the work that we need to be doing is education. We need to be telling people, what is climate change? How does it work? And why should you care about it? And we need to be doing that through social media and press, because that really is the best way to capture people's attention. And so I would say that for people who are doing this work, for people who are climate activists, running a nonprofit, et cetera, I mean, I just honestly reached out to journalists directly. I just emailed them. I told them about the work I was doing and asked if they would be interested in covering it, or if I saw journalists were like doing coverage like related to climate change. I just explained how I really felt like I could add my piece. And so much of this work is about explaining to people, how do I add value and why should you care? And that's something that I've had to do for a lot of my life, especially as like I'm only 19. And so like I had to explain like, okay, well, why do I add value, for example, to this presentation? Why do I add value to the organizations that I want to work with? Like, what can I bring to the table? And so that's a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's important for people, everyone to know, like, what is your value added and why, like, how are you going to be beneficial to the spaces that you want to be in? And so continuing on, I think a bit of a workaround around like getting press and social media attention, because it's hard. Like I definitely for years and months, like nobody knew who I was, nobody knew what work I was doing, because it's really hard to get like journalists to care about you, and it's hard to go viral on social media. So I think that a workaround to that is writing. And writing is something that I've always been passionate about, just like how speaking is something that I've always been passionate about, really sharing my voice. And so really before I was even able to be like featured in any news outlets, I was contacting editors and really writing and getting my word out through prose. And so like these are some examples of the articles that I've written. And so like I'll give the MTV one as an example. So last year I wrote about how Earth Day has passed, now what? And so I was really writing about how I felt like after Earth Day is over, we have like this one day of action. Everyone's talking about climate change. Everyone cares so much. And then all of a sudden, like, bam, the day is over. Everyone goes back to normal life. We don't really talk about it. We don't acknowledge it. And so you want to give people like tangible things to do. You want to tell them, okay, well, this happened. Like, now what can you do about it? If you care about climate change, like, this is what you can do, which is a question I get asked a lot. People tell me like, I know climate change is the biggest issue of our time, but what can I do about it? And that's a valid question. And usually the advice that I give, and like I'll reiterate this at the end of my presentation, is you can volunteer with climate organizations. You can found your own climate organization. You can donate to climate nonprofits. Really, you can make like small changes to your lifestyle, like eating more sustainably and shopping more sustainably, like cutting your intake of meat and avoiding fast fashion and thrifting. But above all, like, I think that people need to vote for climate friendly candidates. But again, I'll reiterate this at the end. And so that leads me to my work with the United Nations. So kind of to go back to where we left off, Last year, I launched my nonprofit, Climate Cardinals, after realizing there was really like this empty void in the climate movement where people weren't working on language accessibility that I felt needed to be filled. And then really talking about my own experience in Iran. And so anyway, so I founded this nonprofit. I've been working on it. And so this happened last summer. The United Nations approached me and they said that I was nominated for their inaugural United Nations Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. And I graciously accepted the nomination. It was like the coolest thing to ever happen to me. And then a month later, they let me know that I had been selected. So I represent the United States on the Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. So really what this means is the UN Secretary General, like the person who oversees the entire United Nations, the head of the UN, climate change is one of his priorities. And I basically and the 6 other young people from around the world get to meet with him on a quarterly basis, and we give him feedback on his climate strategy. What are his priorities for the year? What do we think that he should talk more about? And so each of us really has an area of specialty. And for me, like I said, what I'm passionate about is education, and I'm passionate about language accessibility. And when it came to language accessibility, so like one thing that not a lot of people know about the UN is like, so the UN has 6 official languages, but so they translate all of their information. Like for example, the UN like IPCC report, which is like basically the climate report that says like, how is our planet doing? Like, what do we need to do? How many degrees of warming are we going to reach if we like stay like this? So that is basically like the most important report on climate change. And that is only officially available in 6 languages. And those 6 languages only account for like less than 50% of the world's population. So half of the people in the world, no matter how much they might care about climate change, they're unable to learn about climate change, which I really think is a shame. And so really my strongest recommendation to the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, was that he needed to be translating his climate strategy and the UN documents, the climate documents, into more languages. And so I basically coordinated a campaign, like a partnership between the UN and Climate Cardinals, the UN Environmental Program. And so we translated their Youth for Nature manifesto, which was basically like this long document about the reason why we need to take action on biodiversity, why young people care about this, why we need to really save our planet. We translated that into dozens of languages, which really helps to increase its reach. It made it the most widely distributed petition on planetary health ever, which I think is amazing. And it really showed me the power of young people. Like as a young person, at just like 18, I was able to collaborate with the UN, like with my nonprofit, and we were able to really make a change in making these documents more accessible to others. And then in addition to that, I really would say that the biggest thing that I and the other youth advisors have accomplished while at the UN, I mean, I think it's been like 8 months that we've been serving. So I think one of the other biggest things that we've been able to do is we held a global youth consultation. And so basically we got together many young people from over 20 countries, and we got them together on a Zoom call, and we broke them up into groups and we asked them questions. And we basically compiled all of their opinions on climate change. What are their priorities? What are they scared about? What do they want our world leaders to know that they prioritize? So we compiled all of this into a report, which we published, which was our Global Youth Outreach Outcome Report. And so basically we found these like 6 key points, which was like what young people from over 20 countries want. And like these were like established climate activists, like some of the leading young people in over 21 countries. And so in this report, you can see we really found that young people want investment into green jobs and training, because we really want to be youth entrepreneurs and we want to hold decision makers accountable. And we also found that young people don't want all these polluter bailouts with public money. They really are causing widespread anger among us, and we think that they must cease. We also want a just transition to net zero emissions, really, especially for the communities that currently rely on fossil fuels. I think something that's really important to emphasize is that we can't just cut like fossil fuels cold turkey and then let these mostly marginalized workers and like lower income workers who are like within these fossil fuel industries just have no job. Like that wouldn't make any sense, and that's not fair. And so a large part of the work we're doing is we're advocating for a just transition, so that you're allocating funding to be retraining these workers so that they can work in the clean energy sector instead of the fossil fuel industry, but so that they still have a job and they still have an income. We also believe that Indigenous people and local communities must have their rights respected and enforced and be included in decision making. This is a point I really want to emphasize because I think it's so important for there to be Indigenous inclusion within climate dialogues, because Indigenous people have been advocating for the saving of our planet for years and years, far before I was doing this work and far before most people were doing this work. Because the way that Indigenous people live is very much intertwined with the planet, and they don't want us to be destroying the planet. And they just have very climate friendly lifestyles. And we also have like stolen all of their land and really polluted it. And so I think that's part of the reason why it's so important to have these Indigenous people involved in these discussions and really respecting them as people who were here far before us and who should really have their voices respected when it comes to how much they want to advocate for protecting our planet. So of course, like I've said a million times, climate education is so important. That really is what I've been working on. And we need to be including all of these people from diverse perspectives who really have a unique view on climate education and how it affects all of us. We need to be including them in these discussions. And then lastly, of course, protecting our forests and ecosystems is essential, and we need to be recognizing the potential of our oceans to tackle the climate crisis through these global networks of sanctuaries, and really strengthening laws and punishing people who are just not considering that we can't just be prioritizing profit over planet. We need to be realizing that these corporations know what they're doing and they don't care that they're damaging our earth. And we can't just let them continue to let corporate greed rule over us. And we really need to set these boundaries and make sure that our public officials know that they need to be holding these corporations responsible and prioritizing our futures. And so moving on from my work with the UN, I think one of the biggest takeaways I've had through this work is that we need to be moving from apathy towards action. And what I mean from this is a question I get asked very often is, what about climate deniers, like many Republicans who say that they don't believe in climate change does not exist, so therefore, because this is a hoax, we don't need to do anything about it. And my response is always that the way that I feel about climate deniers is I feel like while there is definitely a lot of misinformation about climate change, which is part of the reason why some people don't believe in it, a lot of people who don't believe in climate change are just saying that because they have like some sort of agenda, and it is nearly impossible to change their minds about that when it's something where they're directly profiting and benefiting off of the fact that people are not believing in climate change, and therefore it's very hard to reason with them. And so instead of focusing on these people who I know, no matter how much I yell and cry and tell them like this is an issue that needs to be paid attention to, they won't change their minds. And so why would I spend 10 hours of my time talking to someone who I know will never change their mind when I could spend 10 hours of my time talking to 10 different people who know climate change is real, because it is real, it's not debatable. But they just aren't doing anything about it. And I think about like a lot of my friends, like when I first like started this work, they were like, oh yeah, like Sophia, that's so cool that you're a climate activist and like climate change is so important. And then I was like, and so what? And so like, what are you going to do about it? Like, you agree with me that climate change is an issue, but you're just like kind of sitting on the sidelines watching me, and you're not getting engaged and you're not doing anything about it. So how can I change that? How can I really provide you opportunities and resources and education for how you can make a difference? And that is how I really have seen the biggest impact. Talking to people who agree with me that climate change is real and that it's a big issue, but they don't know what to do. They don't know what next steps to take. And so that's what I always do. I talk to my friends, I talk to my relatives, I talk to everyone who tells me they care about climate change, and I tell them what they can do about it, which again, I'll reiterate this at the end, like my long list, but really at the top is telling people to vote for climate friendly candidates, because I really feel like this is a policy issue, and the only way we're going to see widespread action is through governmental regulation. And so these are a couple of the opportunities that you can use to get involved if you care about climate change, but you're just not really sure where to start. So I'm just giving some opportunities in my personal experience that I started with that I think are great ways to get involved. And so actually first I'm going to give a little plug to Climate Cardinals, but for anyone who's interested, you can apply to join our team. Like, we have applications for our resources team and education team, so that you can really help to do behind the scenes work on like organizing the resources that we've already translated, disseminating those resources through different schools and different partnerships, et cetera, et cetera. And then, as I said earlier, like, I think that nonviolent civil disobedience, like really going out into the streets and striking the same way that we did in the civil rights era, that is how we're going to get people to pay attention. That is why the climate movement has seen a huge boom in the last few years, because we have gotten into the streets and we have screamed and we have said we want like public officials to take action. And even though it sounds like crazy, you need to realize like these things work. When you have public demonstrations and you have people disrupting our systems and skipping school, skipping work to make a stand, that is going to move the needle. And so you can get involved with groups like Fridays for Future, and like on their website, it provides a map of like different strikes happening and different groups that you can connect with. A lot of this is going to happen like post-COVID, which hopefully we're getting there at the end of the year, close to it. But there are also digital strikes and digital actions that you can take part in, where you're really trying to put pressure on big companies that are like really supporting the fossil fuel industry. And then, like I was saying, for digital strikes, so Fridays for Future Digital is a really awesome organization that really specializes in like online digital things that you can do, like small actions to really make a change. There's also another organization called One Up Action, where they really focus on creating chapters all around the world of like little tiny actions you can make to be like climate positive, like planting trees and like changing your personal behavior, implementing community cleanups, things of that nature. And then 0 Hour, like I said, they also have chapters all around the world, especially for young people who want to get involved and really voice their opinions and organize events in their communities. So a lot of these are for young people, but I would say generally groups like the Sunrise Movement is also a great way to get involved, and also just local organizations in general. There are so many local chapters of like climate nonprofits, and I think those are especially valuable because local organizations are working to lobby local officials and to get local officials to commit to climate justice and to commit to passing legislation that will make your community more sustainable. And so, like I've been saying for a long time, you need to also create your own opportunities. And that's what I've been doing for a lot of my life. And so, like I said, like I noticed that there was no space in the climate movement for climate translation. And so I created that space. And I think a lot of it has to do with, like, I know that networking is like a really tired concept, but the way that I got involved with the climate movement was by reaching out to other activists over social media. I DM'd everyone on Instagram and I asked them about how I could get involved. And I explained to them how I felt like I could add value as a student with my previous experience translating climate information. And again, just reiterating why I cared about this issue. I think when you really present yourself as an authentic person and you have a clear reasoning as for why you're passionate about an issue, that really comes across to people well. And people knew like I wasn't just like some random person like screaming and like wanting to get involved, but I was like someone who had a personal connection and a personal experience and an emotionally compelling experience for why I wanted to get involved. And I mean, I got this opportunity to speak with you all over Instagram through a DM. And so I think it really does emphasize the importance of like leveraging your networks and leveraging people that you know, to create opportunities for yourself, especially when it comes to advocating for something you're passionate about, like climate change. But it doesn't even have to be limited to climate change. Just in general, I would say for any issues that you're passionate about, it's so important to create opportunities and to reach out to people to be involved in spaces that you know you can add value. And so that leads me really to my last point about what else can you do. So I alluded to this earlier, but the number one biggest thing that I think people can do and that I think people should do if you are of age is vote. Because 100 companies, like they contribute to 71% of the world's emissions. So no matter how much really I believe that you or I or anyone does on an individual basis, even though that's valuable, it is not going to move the needle far enough for us to stay below 1.5 degrees of warming, which is really what we need. And so in order to really get there, we need to be putting pressure on these elected officials. So it really also goes back to making sure that not only you are voting for a candidate that has pledged to like support climate action and that has like ideas for climate policies, not only you, but also making sure that you're checking in with your friends and you're sharing information with them, like blah, blah, blah has the best like climate plan out of everyone who's running for office, backing that up with statistics and saying, oh, like I remember that you said climate change is an issue you cared a lot about. And so I really want to inform you why I think this candidate is the best person because of their commitment to climate action. And also, I mean, I'm 19. I like was below the age of 18 for a really long time. And so even for like people younger than the age of 18, I think that there's so much that you can do. Like you can help to support elected officials by like lobbying for them and making phone calls, like phone banking for them, organizing like support and rallies, especially, and also like social media support for them and informing the adults in your life about really what they can do, like who they can vote for. And I also think it's so important not only to support elected officials, but to also hold elected officials accountable. So you can support a candidate like that believes in climate change while also wanting them to do better and to go further, kind of like how I currently like support our current president, Joe Biden, but I also want him to be more ambitious and to stop pipelines being built and also to support the Green New Deal. And so I can do those two things simultaneously. And I think that that's what a lot of people should do, is to support these officials that take climate change seriously, but also expect better from them and realize that even with us like re-entering the Paris Climate Agreement, on the whole, we are so far behind in terms of like meeting our commitments that we need by 2030 that it's really going to be impossible unless we pass comprehensive like national legislation that's setting benchmarks and making sure that we're like telling corporations that there is only like a certain amount of emissions that they can emit, and they really need to be spending money on cleaning up their supply systems and also putting money towards that so that it's easier for organizations to do that work. And then for students, I think that it's really awesome to be able to get your school board to pass a climate resolution or just to do things like more generally on a local scale. And so when I say like pass a climate resolution, like I've been saying, I think a lot of this work really goes back to education. So if you're teaching young people not only that like climate, like what climate change is, how it works, but also how it affects communities, like talking about how like environmental racism is really where like pipelines and all these like polluting energy sectors, like they tend to be built in minority neighborhoods. Like on average, like they tend to be like per capita, like more so in these minority neighborhoods, which like really illustrates environmental racism. And so people of color are more likely to be impacted by these environmental effects. And so getting your school board to pass a climate resolution where it's like, even if they are teaching about climate change, they need to be teaching about climate justice and like really looking at this through an intersectional lens where it's a multifaceted issue. Climate change affects every single aspect of our lives. And we need to be talking about human rights when we're talking about it. For example, when you're looking at like sustainable fashion, like not only is fast fashion. Not only is fast fashion horrible for our planet, but you also have workers being underpaid to labor in extremely unsafe conditions. And it is really a human rights violation what's happening. And so we need to be talking to students about this. We need to be talking to everyone about this so that people realize it's not just a matter of like our earth getting hotter and like climate like induced disasters getting worse, but it's also about how it's affecting different communities differently and how we need to make sure that we're being a voice for these communities. And so also doing your best to support businesses that have divested from fossil fuels and just generally are committed to being more sustainable, especially like working with your local businesses and businesses that are really like working to recycle everything, even though our recycling system is like really broken. So more so like businesses who aren't using any plastic, who are doing everything renewably and like using glass plates, glass everything, no plastic straws. Even though I know right now like things are a little different because of COVID, because everything needs to be like single use. But just in general, I think that it's awesome to be able to support local businesses, especially those that are committed to climate action and are doing like small things to do their part. And really finally, educating yourself and others. That's something that I always preach, especially in regards to a phrase I often like to use is owning your privilege. So people ask me, like, in addition to like volunteering with different climate organizations and doing like lobbying for elected officials, in addition to that work, like what can you actually do on like an individual basis? And so I think about it as owning your privilege in the way that I'm not just going to tell everyone like stop like shopping from Forever 21, even though like I think that that is the right like a good thing to do. The truth of the matter is that rich people contribute to climate change way more than people who are like less socioeconomically in power. And that's because like the consumption of people who are richer is just so much higher, and like rich people are on average using way more fossil fuels. And so when you are like, you have more money and you are in this position of privilege, you should really be using it. And so I think that people who are in those positions have more of an obligation to be taking these steps, to be shopping more sustainably, to be thrifting, even though I think thrifting is like really accessible to everyone because it's pretty inexpensive. I buy most of my clothes from Mercari and Depop and Poshmark, which are online like secondhand retailers. And so I think that like if you can afford to not shop from fast fashion, I think that's something you should do. And then also if you can, like if it makes sense for you to be cutting meat from your diet, if that's something that's not going to be unhealthy for you, that's also a great way that you can make a difference, just because the meat industry is really, really polluting. And then, like I was saying, educating yourself and others also has to do with like talking about climate science, telling your relatives, your friends, everyone around you about how they can make a difference when it comes to climate change, telling them about these opportunities that I've been relaying to you all, and telling them to vote for people who are really going to make a difference. And so I know I've been talking for an hour straight. So I really want to give you all an opportunity to pick my brain if there's anything that you want to know more about. If there's anything you're curious about, I would love to answer all of your questions. But other than that, I mean, it's been such a pleasure talking about my journey. And I hope that this was useful, especially for anyone who wants to start their own nonprofit or anyone who really feels like they care about climate change but doesn't know how to make a difference.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Honestly, the pleasure is all ours. When I was 19, I wish I could have accomplished half the things you've accomplished so far. I'm 23 now, and my resume doesn't look nearly as incredible. So it's very impressive.
Thank you so much.
We do have a couple of questions coming in the chat, and I suggest if anyone has any to go ahead and just put them there, and we'll try to get through all of them. Our first question is, beyond relying on the media and social media, do you have any resources young people could use to educate themselves on climate change?
When it comes to educating yourself on climate change, I definitely think that like you don't need to just limit yourself to social media and like learning from others, but you can really take initiative. Like I was saying, the United Nations has so many amazing resources on their website to learn about climate change, which are now available in more languages other than English for anyone who doesn't speak English. So I would definitely recommend like anyone who wants to learn more about climate change. I think that the UN's webpage is a really, really great resource. And then also books like the Green New Deal that talk about climate change and also like why we need legislation. That's also a great place to start.
Awesome. We have a question, and this is a question I was also thinking about is climate change is it's this massive thing. It's incredibly daunting. You know, if you start learning about the intricacies, it kind of seems like it never ends. There's always something else to learn. And so one of the questions we got in the chat was, who has been your sort of support system throughout climate advocacy, and how have they helped you sort of overcome the disheartening realities of climate change?
I would say so many people have helped me along my journey, but I would say definitely like starting in the beginning, like all the way back to like sixth grade, which is when I first learned about climate change from my teachers. I mean, it was upsetting because you're learning like, oh my gosh, there is this invisible problem happening that very few people are talking about, where our Earth is warming at an alarming rate, and it's really making these weather disasters worse and worse every year. And so as a young person, you feel helpless because you're not in a position of power, like a very young person, like 11, 12. Like, what are you supposed to do about that? And so that is very disheartening. But I would say that my teachers and my parents, I mean, they really reiterated to me that like, you need to be the change that you want to see in the world. If you see that the world is going down a bad path, then you really need to be a voice of change and you need to advocate for things to be different. And so hearing that from my teachers, from my parents, that yes, like it's horrible that these things are happening, but in 10 years, like you're going to be in a position where you can talk about it and you can also like go to school and learn about how you can fix it. I think that that did really make me realize, well, not all is lost. I have so many brilliant friends that I'm sure are going to be changing the world in amazing ways. And so it's really just about trusting the process and hoping for the best and doing all you can to educate yourself and like to talk about these issues.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I have a personal question. It often, like you discussed, it's hard for younger people to discuss climate change with sort of the climate deniers of the world. And so, do you have any advice for young people who maybe their direct support system and their friends or their parents don't necessarily buy into it, and how they can sort of guide them down that path?
I think that's a great question. And I would say it would like differentiate based on the scenario. But what I've always found is most effective, just in general, like not even just with climate general deniers, but just in general, is really talking about things from a personal point of view. Like even when you're talking to your parents about like anything, like they're probably thinking, well, like why should I care? And usually it's like if your child is emotional about something and they have a personal connection to it, like you're saying, I'm worried for my future. Like I know that in 10, 20 years, like the coastline that we live on, it's going to be underwater. Like that really worries me. Isn't that something that worries you too? Like really using an emotional appeal and leaning into that and being like, oh, like look at Texas. Like, do you see how things are freezing over? We might lose our house. Like all these terrible things are happening, knowing that that is entirely not entirely preventable, but we can make these things better by paying attention to our planet and limiting our consumption of fossil fuels so that we don't make these weather disasters worse and worse every single year and really keep digging ourselves into a deeper hole. And so I definitely would say like being able to articulate how climate change is affecting that specific person and you, really using those emotional appeals is usually effective, but also realizing that sometimes people aren't going to believe in climate change. And that's okay. We don't need everyone to believe in climate change. We need almost everyone to believe. And so even if someone is so stuck in their ways and it's so frustrating for you, just realize instead of using another 10 hours of your time trying to convince them, just move on to the next person.
Awesome. Our next question comes from the chat, and it's, have you encouraged communities to stop outside games and activities when there is a high smog count like they do in Los Angeles? I would assume they're referring to like school plans.
I mean, I definitely think that when it comes to like an area where it is really high smog and it's like having an adverse effect on your health, like it is not safe to be outside. In my presentation, I showed that like all these people were hospitalized because of how bad the pollution was in Iran, and like that's making asthma worse, and it really is horrible for your health. And so I would say like definitely in areas like that, I mean, it's best to get away from areas like that for your own health, but also to be like going directly to like community leaders in those areas and talking about these issues and seeing if there's any way that like the community can work together to like make it better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really tricky issue because obviously, you want younger people to have recess to be able to go outside, but you want to make sure that we're being safe about these sorts of things. So I thank whoever sent that message in the chat. Another question someone had is, other than language barriers, what are your main challenges in your UN advocacy?
I think that there are a lot of challenges in my UN advocacy just because I think that there is a bit of an institutional barrier when it comes to young people like going into positions of power, where no matter how much like I can yell at these like world leaders that like I think that they need to be addressing like climate justice, like instead of just talking about climate change, like they really need to outline in plain terms the fact that like this issue is disproportionately affecting minority communities. I think that's really important. And they need to be coming up with solutions that prioritize these frontline communities. But like some people either A, don't believe in that, or like B, they don't want to make that like a central focus of like the work that they're doing, which actually I don't understand and I don't agree with. But it's like sometimes you do have to just like accept that, and you have to like continue working, noticing that not everyone's going to listen to you, not everyone's going to take you seriously, especially when you are a young person. So if one room is just completely not open to you and not listening, just go to the next room and realize that like while there might not be an opportunity for me to like work with one particular person within the UN or one particular system, I just go on to the next system and see like where else I can make change happen.
Absolutely. Something you harped on a lot in your presentation that I think is really important is that climate change and environmental justice, it happens at a policy level. And so we have to, make sure we're getting out and voting, but we're also holding politicians accountable. Obviously, President Joe Biden does not support the Green New Deal as it was originally passed. But I'm wondering if there's any initiatives or anything that you've seen from his presidency that shows signs moving forward that we are going to address this issue finally.
Absolutely. I mean, I wholeheartedly support President Biden. I voted for him. He was like my first general election vote ever. I'm so excited that he's president, and I know that he cares about climate change. And I think he has an amazing climate team. And obviously, rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement, that was awesome. But I think that that's step one. And we have gotten to the baseline, like we're at the bare minimum now, and it's time to build on that. And I think that honestly, like, I think with the right amount of pressure and talking to Biden about these issues, I really do think that we can get him to support the Green New Deal, or at least some version of it. And so I definitely 100% see potential there. And I would love to work with President Biden. And I hope that he takes climate activists seriously. And I hope that he continues to progress on climate change, because I think that a solid foundation is already in place.
Awesome. Just to go a little further, I'd love to pick your mind on sort of, like the big issues. So if you could enact like 3 policy initiatives right now, just on the spot, you had complete control. Is there any sort of areas you would go to, as in, renewable energy or something tackling fast fashion or anything like that?
Definitely I would say ban fracking, like stop the creation of different pipelines, and really instituting policies that are putting like a cap on the amount of emissions that a company can put out. And then if they are exceeding that, then basically penalizing them and putting like a tax, like a carbon tax on them, or like really going further and like directly saying that they can't operate. Because I really do think like those are things that we need to be doing, because I know it's punitive and people think that that's going to hurt our economy. But the truth of the matter is the longer we wait on addressing this issue, the more it's going to cost in the long run, especially when it comes to like issues like fast fashion. Fast fashion culture is absolutely not sustainable. If you look at how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected the fast fashion industry, you had millions of orders not being fulfilled, like because like COVID just like shut everything down, like people weren't buying anymore, like just everything was going crazy. And so you had all these people like all these companies defaulting on their orders. And so all thousands of workers weren't being paid. You just had all this excess garment piling up in factories that like had to be burned. And so we can't operate like this anymore. It just doesn't make sense. And we need to make sure that we're really leaning into a circular economy where people are owning things and buying things that they really need to like survive. And like, you don't need like 100 pairs of pants, like, you know what I mean? And so I think that it's not even just policy, but also like a cultural mind shift that we need, where when we're redesigning these systems, we also need people to buy into them. We need people to be supporting these institutional changes, or else they're not going to be effective. And so we need people to also be changing their mindset and not just thinking like the way that fashion needs to be is like, I need to be able to buy a $2 shirt like all the time, like every week. Instead, it really should be like, oh, like I'm focusing on like buying quality pieces for my wardrobe that I can use year after year. Because I don't remember the statistic, but there is like an alarming statistic about how people just like will wear like a tank top and then it just ends up in the landfill, which is horrible. And so while we're like instituting these policy measures to like carbon tax, stuff like that, we also need people to be changing their minds like set so that they're supporting these companies and like supporting the changes that they're implementing.
Awesome. Yeah, I think I am right on the cusp of Gen Z. Was born in 1997, so I'm like, somewhere in the middle. And I found that with a lot of people I went to, high school and undergrad with, it's sort of, buy that T-shirt from Target, wear it maybe once or twice out, and then throw it away. And so I think that fast fashion is sort of the silent killer when it comes to climate change. I was wondering, I don't think everyone in the audience had the chance to, but I read your Refinery 29 Day in the Life article. And I was wondering if you could just give everyone like a brief overview of how your day in your life is, especially now that COVID kind of restricts everything.
Yeah, that's such a great question. My life really, my day-to-day varies so much depending on like conferences and meetings that I have, but like I'll go through like one example. So like I said, I'm a freshman in college right now. I'm a freshman at Indiana University studying public policy analysis at the Kelley School of Business. And so that has definitely changed my day-to-day a lot because I have so much homework in classes now. But like, for example, on like a Wednesday, on a weekday, usually what happens is like I'll wake up. First thing I do is like check my inbox, respond to my emails. And then after that, I usually have meetings either for the UN, like we'll have like weekly meetings with different like UN agencies, different people who want to meet with us. So then I'll have like a UN meeting, then I'll usually have some sort of internal like Climate Cardinals meeting, like talking about, okay, like what's our grant strategy? What projects do we have in the works right now? Like how are we, right now we're working on a chapter system and really growing our chapter system. So like touching base on that, meeting with my directors. And then after that, I'll have like a lecture or something, or I'll definitely have like a large chunk of homework that I need to do. And then in addition to that, I usually have like things like this, like a conference that I need to speak at or attend. And then I also have like different random like projects that I'm working on. Like I'm also a senior partner at Juve Consulting, which is a Gen Z marketing agency. So I'll usually be like working on like a marketing strategy for a client to make money, because being a student is expensive, as I'm sure a lot of you know. So that's like my part-time job. And then obviously like in the middle of all of that, like I need time to just chill and just be on my phone and like look at TikTok for an hour. So I always like make time for that. And then usually like I live with my sister, because I'm still at home because my college is virtual, sadly. So I usually go on a run or like a walk with my sister, and then I also like FaceTime my friends like constantly because I miss them, and I don't want to be like too unsafe because of COVID and like go hang out with all my friends. So I usually FaceTime my friends, and then like on a rare day I'll like go socially distance, like walk with one of my friends or like eat lunch outside or something like that. But definitely very, very busy.
Yeah, I've fallen into that TikTok trap a little bit too many times. During the summer, I had to just delete the app off my phone because you can spend I mean, there's a lot of content on there that's, you watch it and you forget about it, but there is a lot of really good news content, a lot of really good ways that younger people are using TikTok and Instagram to sort of, spread their message, which I think it's incredibly cool that that's something we're able to do nowadays.
Yeah,
Um,
100%. I mean, that's how Climate Cardinals started. Like I said, like that video initially that we made, which really got us off the ground and got us over 1,000 volunteers, like that has over 400,000 views now. And Climate Cardinals has a TikTok account that has over like 30,000 likes, something like that. And so like through social media, we've been able to get pretty much all of our volunteers. And so while I totally agree with you, I honestly delete TikTok like weekly. Like I'll realize like I'm on TikTok too much, delete the app, and then like re-download it the next day. Vicious cycle. But even though I know that it's like kind of time consuming and like stupid trash sometimes, I also think you really can't understate how this generation has leveraged technology in a really, really positive way.
Absolutely. We did have another question in the chat, and it's, could you possibly expand on what you envision after the pandemic is over, and maybe even after you graduate college and sort of enter the working world?
So for me personally, I think that after I graduate college, I probably want to go to some sort of grad school. I think environmental law is where I'm leaning. So we'll see how that pans out. And then after that, I think I definitely want to continue to do policy work. So probably with the UN or other think tanks, something in those vein. So that's me. I'm sure it'll change a lot though, because if you asked me like 3 years ago, like, do you see yourself being basically like a full-time climate activist and having your own organization? I would have said like, absolutely not. Like I didn't expect to be in this position. It's been crazy for me. These past few years have completely changed my life and my life trajectory, even though I'm just 19. And so I'm open to what the future brings to me. Even if it's not climate related, I'm always going to care about climate change. Climate change is an issue that is just so ingrained in my life because it's something I truly care about. But I'm totally open to like also exploring other career paths. I don't want my entire life to be consumed by doom and gloom and just thinking like, oh my God, our planet is on fire and nobody's doing anything about it. I also have other passions, like I said, writing and speaking. And I want to continue to pursue those in a capacity that isn't solely limited to climate change, but also exploring and seeing what else I'm passionate about, which I think every young person should do. I don't think we should just like limit ourselves. And then on a general note for where I see like climate activism going, I think that post-pandemic strikes, nonviolent civil disobedience, all of that jazz is definitely going to come back and be really important, just because I think that's a great way to put pressure on public officials. So that's really where I hope that the climate movement is going to be headed again.
I might not be the perfect ambassador, but I can say that, getting a law degree focusing in environmental law, it's a cool path, as I'm sure a couple of people on this conference could tell you. I just want to remind everyone that we are still taking questions, and I have a couple more to go through with you, if that's okay. I'm curious where you see Climate Cardinals moving forward. So possibly, a partnership with the UN, or some sort of expansion, because obviously you've just started and it's already grown so much. And so I'm curious to see where you think the future is for that.
I definitely want Climate Cardinals to continue the work we're doing, especially in terms of partnering with big organizations. We are partnered with the UN, and right now we're working to translate, we're going to be translating this report summary for UNICEF, where they're working on this climate change and child mobility report, which they're going to be releasing soon. So we're going to be working to translate that, which I think is awesome. But just more generally, continuing to partner with big organizations, big climate organizations, and scientists. I think that's one thing we definitely want to do, because there's definitely an issue in the scientific world where it was the world's largest journal, 80% of their articles are only available in English, which I think is absurd, absolutely absurd. And so I want Climate Cardinals to continue to grow, to have more volunteers, and to have greater capability to partner with organizations and with scientific journals and scientists to translate their research and to translate different reports that I think will be beneficial for the general public. And also, hopefully, in the next 10 years, AI will become a huge part of the work we're doing. So we don't just need to limit ourselves to human translators who are prone to error, but also having amazing computer assisted translations that can just be done on the fly.
I think that would be really cool. I've never really thought about utilizing AI like that. And so I think that's a really cool way. A question I sort of had is, on your Wikipedia page, you have this incredible picture of you and Jane Fonda. And so I'm wondering if you've been able to sort of work with other celebrities, and if that experience is something that, allows, maybe it connects climate change deeper to a younger audience.
For sure. I can just elaborate more on what happened with Jane Fonda, I guess, because I definitely do think that was the biggest name or whatever that I've come in contact with and worked with. So basically, when I was working with Fridays for Future, we organized this Fridays for Future Black Friday strike. And it was in DC, right outside of the Capitol building, where Jane Fonda was holding her her strikes, her Friday strikes. And so we basically kind of partnered with her, where we were oh, can we, because she had set up this stage. And so we asked her if, it was Fire Drill Fridays, that's what her initiative was called. And so we basically asked her hey, can we use your stage and your setup for our strike and for our speeches? And she was yeah, for sure. We had gotten in contact with her team. And so right before we took over her stage and did our strike and our speech, I got to meet her. And so that's where that photo that you're talking about came from. So I met her right under the Capitol building. And we basically, I just talked about how I thought she was such an awesome inspiration. And it's so great to see people in Hollywood, people who have so much power and so much influence and a huge platform, talking about this issue and really having their impressionable audience care about it as well. Especially, I would say, because Jane Fonda is older, and for example, my parents are oh my God, and Jane Fonda is so amazing. Whereas I would say me and you, and people our age, they would be more if you say, I don't know, Charlie D'Amelio or something, yeah. They'd probably be oh my gosh, that's so cool. But for people my parents' age, seeing Jane Fonda work on climate action, I think is so important, because young people on average care about climate change more, believe in climate change more, but then having Jane Fonda and older people speak to these older people and telling them about climate change, I think is super valuable. So anyway, I digressed, but I got to meet her. I took that picture with her, and then I continued to work with her. She actually held this conference with all these like youth climate activists who came from New York City like a weekend later after we had that initial meeting, which I was invited to. And we just basically had this like roundtable discussion about the future of climate activism, how adult allies can really work with young people to amplify our voices the way that she did. And also to talk to the older generation. So that was awesome, a very awesome experience. And I definitely think that it's so important for celebrities and people with platforms to be using their voices and to be talking about this issue.
Yeah, all I'm imagining now is a climate change organization, getting a sponsorship with the D'Amelio sisters and her just doing some sort of dance on TikTok and just the sheer amount of
I hope she
engagement.
does. Yeah.
That would be incredible. I mean, I don't get it because maybe I grew up with it a little slow, but the sheer amount of outreach you're able to get when you are dubbed sort of an influencer like that. I think she has like over 100 million,
Yeah, oh my
followers. So just the sheer amount of engagement is crazy. It is approaching time, and I know that it's incredibly late where you are. And so I do not believe we have any further questions. So I just want to thank you again for coming. This has been such an amazing opportunity, and it's incredibly impressive, the sheer amount of work that you have done and that you are doing currently.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It was such a pleasure being able to speak to all of you. And yeah, I'm so grateful for the opportunity, and I hope you all learned a lot. It's only 11 here, so not too late. Don't worry. But again, thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. And I just want to remind everyone that is still watching with us that we have another full day tomorrow of panels. So check out our brochure for more details. But I hope that everyone has a great night.